So there are many books out there to tell you why and how to invest in real estate. You hear buzzwords like passive income, landlording, house hacking, duplexes, triplexes, quads, multifamily dwelling. Tonight, we're talking about investing in real estate rentals. And we're going to find out if it's a good fit for you and what makes a good property rental, actually what makes a good landlord. We're going to cover whether you should manage these properties yourself or whether you should hire a professional management company. And really importantly is how to select tenants, because tenants are really make or break you in your rental business. Landlords and business owners make up about 15% of our population, and real estate investors are said to be amongst the wealthiest people in America. And not that wealth is the most important thing, but it is nice to pay your bills and have a little bit left over to achieve some financial freedom. So, the best phrase that I've heard being in this business is that owning a home, your home, won't make you rich, but owning other people's homes certainly can. So tonight, my guest is coming from the West Coast. She lives in California. You'll see some surfboards in the back there because her and her husband surf. And we're going to meet Dana Dunford. And Dana this is what she lives and breathes every single day. She has a tech company that helps landlords across the country. And I guess we'll find out all about it, but how to manage these properties. And Dana, welcome tonight. We appreciate having you on our Tuesday night podcast.
Excited to be here. Thanks, Todd, for having me.
Absolutely. So kind of tell everybody a little bit about you.
Yeah. So I'm out here in San Francisco, California. My goal and job is to help people build their real estate empires through passive income. But it's not who you think. I don't work with institutionals. Institutionals are actually a small part of the market. Average investors I work with, those with 8 rental units. They start out with 1 and they continue to build from there. So the average kind of customers we work with have 8 rental units. So they live the day to day that you're thinking of building up with a rental portfolio, and really help with the operations side. So after you purchase a property, no matter where it is in the US, how do you manage it? And Todd and I kind of spoke about this when we first met and bonded over it, in the sense there's no right solution for everyone. There's no one solution of this is how you should manage your property. It really depends on you. It depends on the property that you have. It depends on the tenants. And so we'll go ahead and talk about that tonight. And I'm excited to jump into it all.
Yeah, absolutely. And, so tell a little bit about Hemlane. So you started this platform and to help the independents, but so you have about 14,000 doors on the site, right?
Yeah, we have 14,000 rental units. And really, when we looked at the market, this was back in 2014. When we looked at the market, even just for our own investments, there was only 2 options in the market. It was do it yourself of, okay, I'm a real estate investor. I own even just 1 rental property, and I have to do everything myself and make all the decisions and physically be there. Or I can hire a full service traditional manager where I pass over the keys and they do everything for me. And then I get my check every month. And what we found as a solution for both me and my co-founder, as well as most people on our team who have rental properties, is that both solutions kind of miss something, where every single real estate investor is different. There's some real estate investors who are ridiculously good with financials and accounting. They have finance degrees. They've made a lot of money in finance and they go invest in real estate. They are better managing the financials, having the rent go directly to them. And then there's other real estate investors who say, I don't even understand accounting 101, but I'm really good with contracting. I'm a general contractor. I picked up some rental properties. I do the rehabs and stuff like that. But I can't do the accounting, but I can do the repair coordination and, rehabs and things like that. Versus the finance guy is like, I don't even know how to troubleshoot, the electrical outlet not working. And so we really sought out to say there has to be a better solution out there. There has to be a plug and play that empowers owners to manage their properties, have control and transparency, but pick what they need. If you're not good with repair coordination, great. They're specialists we have on the platform. That's all they do. And they're fantastic with it. And so really just providing more optionality in the market. And we really believe a platform is the way to do it, because you can pick and choose what you want and what you need. And what we actually see is some real estate investors have a property down the street that they can manage one way, and then a property on the other side of the country that they manage a different way. And so really providing that flexibility and empowerment. And then one of the other things, Todd, which you and I have spoken about in the industry, and some examples you had, I remember when we first met, is transparency. When you're a real estate investor, you deserve to own that data of what happened, how much am I charged, what are the invoices, and having that transparency and control. I think even if you don't look at it, just knowing it's there for you to view is really, really important. And so that's kind of what we set out to do in the industry with our product, Hemlane. But of course, through it, I learned a lot from other real estate investors about what they've been doing. I hear every day what's going on with their tenants, what's happening day to day in different cities, what cities are booming and things like that. So it's been a really fun business to be in.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll get to dive into some of that intelligence that you have. I can tell you that for the last 15 years, thereabouts, I've been a landlord. And when I first started out, I didn't have a very good experience with it. And I personally, when I started out, gave my properties to a property management company, and things didn't really work out well with that company. I then went to another company, and it was even worse. And you talk about transparency. I mean, I had a lot of conversations with my accountant at the end of the year when we're looking at, actually losing money and determining why. Was a lot of the transparency that you're referring to wasn't there. I had no idea what I was paying for repairs, except a lot. And it seemed like the management company, and believe me, I know there are good management companies out there. And if you have a management company and you're listening, please, we'd love to see your comments, but I'm certainly not attacking you, but there are a lot of, like any businesses out there, good and bad companies. I just so happened to find a couple that weren't so good. And so we'll talk a little bit about what makes a good management company and really who you are, whether you should use a management company or based on your experience or capability, whether you should try and do it yourself. So in 2020, so we're going to go over a couple stats here that I was able to dig out. We were lucky enough that in 2020, we had a new census collection of information. And in 2020, according to census.gov, there were over 43 million, almost 44 million housing units that were occupied by renters in the United States. And that's a big number. So since 1975, we've had a pretty steady upward amount of increase through the years of actual renters, and for a lot of different reasons. Buying a house is not cheap, and it's becoming even less affordable, especially when it's the cash down that a lot of people don't have. And according to the census.gov site, there's 331 million plus or minus people in the United States that occupy about 140 million housing units. So if you're looking at that information, about 30% of all the housing units in the US are rental units. Dana, does that sound accurate?
Yeah, and it's been fluctuating with going up to like 37% of rental households. But like overall, the trend has been, and this is a lot with millennials, that people are renting for longer periods of their life. And so you suddenly see rentals becoming a much larger part of the discussion. You know, I didn't purchase a house at all in my 20s, a primary residence at least. Waited until I was over 30 to do so because of that freedom. And especially now with remote work, with COVID, and things like that, of people potentially wanting to settle down later and having a little bit more freedom. And so I think we're going to continue to see that trend always stay over 30% of housing units will be rentals. And the conversation goes, I think, with a lot of folks who do have the capital. You know, we have investors come to us who do not, they rent their primary residence, but they own all these rental properties. And that's actually really interesting. They're renters themselves and they're owning rental properties. They don't even want to own a physical home because they might be moving from New York to San Francisco to LA or whatever it may be, but they also pick up rental properties. And so I think we'll always generally see that over 30%.
Yeah, which is a big number.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we know that in the US, the landlords are really comprised, of two different kinds of owners. You have institutional landlords and independent owners. And it is said that out of all of the rental unit owners, over half are independent landlords, and that there are about 8 million independent landlords across the country. So if we figure, it's said to be about 24 million of the 44 million units. So 44 million rental units thereabouts in the country, and 24 million of those are said to be owned by independents. And that they also, and you can shed some light to this too, that most of the independents own on average the most 2 units,
Yeah.
and most of them own 1 unit. So is that based on your 14,000 units, would you say that that's accurate?
Yeah, so I know that's accurate across the US. At least ours are real estate investors. We have them become a bit more sophisticated where they have an average of 8 rental units. They have LLCs set up, but you're 100% right. Mass market, they own 1 to 2 rental units. And then kind of the next largest category is LLCs and trusts, which we work a lot with LLCs and trusts. People, Todd, like you, who say, great, I'll own some rental properties, but I definitely don't want it to be personally under my name. To mitigate risk, I'm going to go ahead and put it under an LLC, series LLC, a trust, whatever it may be. And then you're right, institutionals, it's interesting. Institutionals are such a small percentage. So of the 44 million renter households, 16 million are single family homes. So 16 million of the 44 million are single family homes, and institutionals only own 300,000 of those. So a really small portion is institutional. However, institutional now is flooding into single family homes right now, and they have an unfair advantage because they have data. They have these analysts in New York City who are sitting there analyzing properties and have an unfair advantage to go and sweep up a ton of them. And so, that those tools and those resources are definitely coming also to mass market. But I do feel like they do have a lot more of an unfair advantage of understanding the micro and macro climate, which is why it's important, Todd, for people to be on shows like this to understand it a bit more of what's going on with the economy and when should we be purchasing and selling.
So Dana, just kind of, for our listeners, kind of explain what an institutional buyer is. I mean, we hear about these iBuyer platforms. Zillow is a big one, right? With their Zillow offers. I mean, they're buying up houses. So kind of just talk about what an institutional buyer is.
Yeah. And that's a great question, because I remember when I first got into real estate, over 10 years ago, I was like, what does retail mean? Why am I a retail investor? And, it's these foreign words. But anyways, institutionals are ones with large capital to deploy. They're typically like corporations, like big companies that basically have massive books, and they say, we have this asset, this capital to deploy, this money. What are we going to put it into? And there's ones that focus primarily on real estate, of just going in and purchasing a ton of real estate in a market, whether it's single family homes or anything else. And it's managed by this large entity. And they have a ton of capital and a ton of resources to do it. And if they see the market is not good and they make that determination, they're going to just pull out and sell that entire portfolio, or they're going to go in and purchase a lot of it. And so in like the single family home space, there's like Invitation Homes and these like large players that go in and purchase a lot of properties and manage them and then come out. They are still a small part of the market. The mass market is still people like us. But there are the institutionals in there, and they're beginning. I'm just seeing them slowly starting right now. And some people will argue that it's a trend that's going to continue to go. I'm not quite sure. I wonder if the institutionals will kind of taper off. But there's some theory out there to say these institutionals are going to have these huge unfair advantages. They have more data than you or I have. And they have these analysts sitting there ready to purchase and sweep up and take a ton of the properties, which not only hurts rental investors like us, like real estate investors, but it also hurts homeowners who are looking to buy their first home or whatever it is, when someone comes up to the suburbs and sweeps up, 50 of those homes in an already supply constraint market. Right now, you've got more demand than supply on the market.
I think that's a great point that you just brought up, because we've experienced that for the last year and a half, where we've seen very limited inventory. And it's exactly what you're saying. I mean, there are more institutional buyers buying up these single family homes that otherwise would be our first time home buyers. And so it definitely has tightened the market. Now the sellers have benefited big time by it, right?
Yeah,
So,
they have. And actually, one of the interesting things about the institutionals, which is good for us and good for real estate investors, people looking to get into real estate, are saying is, wow, this is a fantastic investment to go into. Single family homes, or just anything, you're buying fourplexes, even commercial properties, multifamily. This is a great asset class to go into. And the institutionals are doing the calculations of, I could put my money in real estate, I could put it in stocks, I could put it in bonds, I could put it in startups, and they're still choosing to put it into this asset class, which will tell you something about how valuable it is to be a real estate investor. But yeah, it will be interesting to see, if you give it 5 years, about how the strategy is playing out, and are they pouring more money into it, or are they retracting some?
and it's interesting because they're definitely different strategies, and we'll talk a little bit about this evening. And by the way, if you guys are listening, we'd love to hear from you. So if you want to comment, we've got a couple comments up there. LinkedIn, great discussion. Milko has commented, good stuff, guys. We appreciate that. We thank you for watching and listening along. And if you guys, we are live, so if you have some questions for either myself or Dana, go ahead and chat them, comment them in. We'll try and answer them. And if you're listening or watching after we're live, go ahead and comment, and we'll be sure to, make sure we answer back your comment. But what Dana's saying here with the different types of, asset classes, when you're investing, certainly single family houses is what we think of a lot when we're buying a place to live. As an investor, we are seeing a lot more, especially millennials, that are getting into real estate investing, where they're doing things like house hacking. So they're buying a place that is a duplex, or maybe it is a triplex, which has 3 units, or a 4-unit building. So really, residential is really, in the industry, is considered up to 4 units in one structure or one house. When you get to that 5th unit, it really flips to more of commercial, even though it's still residential, rentals. So we are seeing a lot. So there's two different plays. One is the single family, and then the other is the multifamily, the 1 to 4, the 2 to 4 unit. It really is important, though, when you are determining what your strategy is on the long term before you actually decide whether a single family is better than a multifamily. And I'll tell you my experience and really what we teach investors on the brokerage side. When you're buying a single family home, it's actually more valuable vacant. So because you're going to sell that to somebody that will buy it to move into and live. A multifamily is going to be more valuable occupied with the highest rents, market rents as you can possibly get, because an investor is typically going to buy those multifamily buildings and they don't want to give you a profit. They don't want to give you appreciation. They want to give you future cash flow. They want to buy it based on what it's going to return to them in their pockets. So what we always say to people investing is, if you're going to keep it forever, go ahead with those multifamily structures. But if you're thinking your strategy is to get out in 5 years or 7 years or sell that, you may be better off with a single family, because someone buying it to live will give you the profit that you're looking for, or that market appreciation. You agree with me on that, Dana?
100%. And I mean, that also has to do with your tenants in the property, right? Because if you are thinking about selling the single family home, working with your tenants and being transparent, if you're thinking about selling it in a year, letting them know, I mean, you might lose a tenant over it, but it will be more valuable from that perspective. So I couldn't agree more with you on that, that if it's even in, 2 units plus, so both multifamily as well as those residential of 2, 3, and 4 plexes, those are much more valuable occupied.
Yes. So your 14,000 doors that you have, what do you find, and even more so your experience in the industry, how are these landlords acquiring these properties? Are you finding that they are moving up in house and they're taking, maybe the townhouse or the condo or the smaller house that maybe they had or their spouse had or what have you, and keeping that and renting it? Or are you finding most of your clients are going out actively buying rental properties?
Yeah, good question. So I would say that if you look at ours, about 20% are accidental landlords. And what I mean by accidental landlord is they used to live in the place, they've upgraded, downgraded, whatever it may be, moved locations, and then decided to keep it. However, a lot of times what we do tell real estate investors when they come to us is that might not be the best investment. Like, you have to treat it like stocks and bonds, where it's like, you don't go and throw a dart and say, like, I'm just going to randomly choose this as an investment, right? So what makes a good primary residence of what you might love because you loved the granite countertops and you loved the tile and you fell in love with the neighborhood, that might not make it a good investment property. It makes it a good primary residence, but it might not make it a good investment property. And so you having a pool of just, hey, this is one property I own and I'm going to make it a rental, it doesn't make sense. So a lot of times we teach investors to use a pro forma. We have a free one online, and basically download this Excel and put the numbers in. And then compare it. And there's like different tabs. And at the beginning, it compares all the properties. And what is this property compared to these other ones I could purchase? Because then you can get into creative things and tax things like 1031s. You could rent it and then change it for a like property and get a different rental, whatever it may be. But don't just become a landlord, an accidental landlord with your property. Be strategic about the investment. And the best investments may not be in your backyard. Doesn't matter where you are. Go and look at investments everywhere else. Like Todd, where you are might be great investments for me versus here in San Francisco. It's interesting that accidental landlords, I find, are the ones who get the one unit or 2 units, and they very quickly get out of the game. And they say, oh, that was terrible. I hated being a landlord and I'm never going to do it again. And there's a couple of reasons for it. They didn't treat it like an investment and they didn't treat it like a business. They went into it. They find out that the cash flow doesn't make a lot of sense for them, or the numbers, whatever it is, cash flow versus appreciation. The numbers didn't make sense because they were only looking at one property versus every property, all 44 million renter households they could have in the US. They were looking at one property in one location, and the numbers don't make sense. Maybe they're super emotionally attached. So if the tenants say, can I paint the walls this color? They say, no, you can't. We have to keep the off-white cream. It's like, who cares, right? If it's going to keep your tenants there for 2 years longer, let them do it and have them repaint it back. So we actually find those accidental landlords who haven't strategically thought about the investment to be the ones that actually never make it in the business. And that's why I say that at least the real estate investors I talk to, and they're small real estate investors, you know, a lot of our customers have 1 to 2 rental units, but they strategically say, I'm going to go find a property. I'm going to compare it against other things in the industry. Great, this makes sense for me. This meets all of my criteria. This is a great deal. And then they purchase it. And then they make sure they have the right insurance or an LLC set up to protect themselves. And then they say, if they're self-managing, that they're a managing member of the entity that owns the property. They're not the owner. You know, they set it up like a business. And once you have that mindset, it makes the management so much easier. The house hacking is an interesting one because I love that one, Todd. I love if someone comes to you and says, Todd, I want to buy a 4-plex and I want to live in one of the units. I still love that strategy because you're getting into the business, but they're going to strategically, when they buy it, compare it against all the other 4-plexes in the area. Right. And so from that perspective, that is not a bad way to go. But I think the accidental of this was my primary residence, I'm going to keep it as a rental. A lot of times I've seen folks who do that get very disappointed with the numbers, with the tenants, with just the process in general. And it's that mindset. And if you can change that and treat it like a business, I think you succeed so much better. And it kind of gets addicting. You want to buy more rental properties.
Well, you said 2 things that I find very interesting. So one is, and I just had a investor, an accidental investor, that he had a house, his wife had a house, they get married, they buy another house. They kept both of the houses, his house, her house. And so we were looking at them to maybe sell them, and the tenants have been in for a long time. Neither one of them were really paying market rents, but worse yet was, like you said, they made the houses the way that they wanted to live, which didn't make a whole lot of sense from a return on your investment. I mean, one had a theater with the screen and the projector and right? So, I mean, would you really do that in an investment property and a rental property? No.
Make it a bedroom.
Yeah. So, and the house is probably worth $750,000 and they're collecting $3,200 in rents.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's not even close to what you would strategically try and do as an intentional investor, right?
Yeah.
And then the other thing that you said, which I found very interesting when I first got into commercial real estate and started to dive into the statistics around the country, is that over 50% of real estate investors, and at least commercial investors, invest in states that they don't reside. Yeah. So what you just said, so it doesn't matter if you're truly an investor and you want to invest and get a return on your investment. I have friends of mine that live here in Maryland. They invest in Florida. And there's somebody that's investing in Colorado. So Ohio, I mean, they're all, investing all over the country because the numbers make sense. So yeah, that is sort of first and foremost. So if you're listening and you're thinking, should I step up in house? And keep in mind, and maybe that's your entry into the rental market, business. Maybe you should be considering what you could sell it for And then, if it is your primary residence, there's a lot of tax benefits, right? 250,000 as a single person, 500,000 as a married couple. So long, and I'm not an accountant, check with your accountants, but so long as that you've lived there for 2 years of primary residence, there's a lot of tax-free advantage or gain advantage that you may be able to take advantage of to get into something else and sell that property versus renting it for a terrible return. And then all the niceties that you put into it, such as a theater room, get destroyed because they didn't pay for it and they don't care about it anyway.
Yeah.
So Dana, let's talk about what these model real estate investors look like. What should they at least be equipped with? They're interested in getting into rental real estate, long-term rental, or maybe it is short-term too, but such as an Airbnb or something like that, vacation rental. But let's kind of go through so that people can say, yep, that's me, check, yep, oh, that's me, So what, if we had to kind of model these investors, besides having really thick skin?
I think they get that over time.
Yeah,
they realize that over time.
So let's model them. What's a real estate investor look like?
Gosh, so I mean, as far as actually what is really interesting with Hemlane and demographics and what people ask us is they're like, who is your target market? Are they like a 40 to 50-year-old Asian lady or what? And actually, it's interesting. They are all over the place. We have like every race, every religion, sex, age, everything on Hemlane. But what actually the ones on Hemlane who like stay in the market are really good. We see them top performers. They all have one thing in common, and it has nothing to do with what jobs they have or education level. They have one thing, which is they are very realistic and focused on making it succeed and being conservative with their numbers. And what I mean by that is I've seen a lot of real estate investors go into Hemlane and they've saved $20,000 and that's all they have. And they just go in and they say, I'm going to buy this property. And they buy one property and they have no reserves, no money left. And they buy a property in potentially a terrible area. Now, $20,000 can get you as a down payment in a decent area in some states and cities. But they buy a property in a terrible area where they can't get qualified tenants. Numbers start going down the drain. They don't understand the neighborhood. They don't understand the types of tenants in that neighborhood. They haven't put together a good list of contractors and folks in the area, like a local team for them. They worked with a really bad real estate agent who was just trying to sell them for the quick win versus building a relationship and making sure they were to succeed. And so all of the real estate investors, when I say here are the ones who are who perform very well with their properties, is they're strategic. What I mean by that is they don't just jump into it one night. They don't just say, I have this $20,000, I'm going to go purchase this property. They go and they look at markets. They get educated. They look at over time what the cash flow would look like. They look at worst case scenario and how many reserves should I have to make sure that if something goes wrong, my tenant doesn't pay for 3 to 6 months, that I have money in the bank to cover that. They make sure they check the property and say the neighborhood and say, this is a neighborhood where I can get a tenant who objectively qualifies. They meet a certain credit criteria. They can meet a certain income criteria. They're stable and they know their market. They know that neighborhood and they work with a really good local team, a really good agent who says, like you, Todd, a really good agent who says, I'm here to succeed and make this a success to build your empire. And this is your first building block and stepping stone. And they don't just jump into it. The ones where I see they don't succeed is they kind of jump into it. It might just be a single family home they purchase, or they jump into it and buy like a 25 unit and decide to self-manage it, but they haven't really thought it through. They haven't done their homework. And so it's not really based on like the demographics or the colleges that these real estate investors went through. It's more of the focus and saying, okay, every Saturday, I'm going to spend 5 hours researching this, and I'm going to become a subject matter expert, and I'm going to make sure I know my market. I'm going to make sure I know how to get everything set up. I'm going to make sure I have the reserves. I'm going to make sure I understand tenant landlord law. Those people who get that set up, and they're like, oh, this is easy. The money just keeps coming into me. This is easy, because they've done that upfront research. And so that's one thing that I would say it's actually kind of fun to do. But they know their market. They've done their research. They work with really good people. They've vetted people. They've gone through referrals and things like that to just make sure that they're going to succeed with their investments.
Yeah, I think that, a lot of good points. I mean, certainly, when you were talking about, they have no reserves, I think that's that's really critical. I mean, you have to have money in the bank. That's saying that it takes money to make money. It is true. I mean, I get so frustrated sometimes because there are so many people out there selling these programs where you can buy something, you don't need any money down. And, maybe you can have success doing that. That's not what I've done. I have not seen investors do that before. You need some cash. You need a couple things. You need to have credit, or you need to have money. And it helps to have both, because if you have some money and you have good credit, then you sort of get like the best of both worlds, because if you are financing, you're going to get better interest rates, which is going to enable you to cash flow more. But I also think that, like you said, you need a team, but you need to have a little bit of knowledge too of what some of the operating systems are in a house, because you can go through, you want to do it, whether you want to self-manage or whether you have somebody else do it for you. You got to have some kind of a clue of what, some of these systems are. The electrical system in the house, not being an electrician, but you need to know whether it's been updated, upgraded, have inspections, understand, heating and air systems, whether the one that you're buying is at end of life and you're going to need to replace it in the next year or two or next month. But really to have a good team and to focus on learning some of the trades that are out there and some of the people that you may need throughout the years of owning these properties, because we are seeing a lot of people now that are buying, like you said, they're renting and they're buying investment properties to rent because they don't think it's a good idea to waste their money on buying a house for themselves. They want to buy an investment property. And that seems to just be trending right now, which is fine. I mean, hey, look, I think it's great, but definitely having some basic knowledge of the components of a house. And then you're going to need some thick skin too. You have, whether you've been in business or not, you have to deal with people, and, there are decisions that you're going to have to make, and you're going to have to interview people. And even if you have a property management company, you're going to need to be involved, or it may not work out well for you. Like I said, when I got into it, I had management companies that were really robbing me blind. And, but we'll kind of get into that because I do want to talk about management companies, but let's kind of go over what makes a good rental. We know that not necessarily keeping your existing house as you're moving up, that doesn't necessarily make a good rental, because you may have amenities and things in that house that you built for you, and it's better off to profit from that on the sales side. And you may not be getting those target numbers. I like to be as close as I can be to what I have as a 1% rule or more if possible, meaning, keep it simple. If I'm all in on a property at $300,000, that property needs to rent for $3,000 a month. For me, that's sort of like a quick check. So if I go and I look at a place and it needs work, then that has to be part of the consideration, renovation costs that go into that overall $300,000 price. But I'm not looking at houses that are $500,000 that I can rent for $3,000 a month. Those numbers, though they may work depending on how you're financing, if you really want to be in the rental real estate business, there's a better way to get you there. And it's closer to what I'm saying. So, you can go by, okay, now we need to at least be close to that 1% rule. So that may change the area that you're focusing on. But like Dana mentioned, jobs are important. I mean, if you have to know who's paying your rent, and if maybe walk scores are important, that if you're renting someplace where the employers are close, or shopping's close, that has the tendency to be more expensive, but maybe you can go just outside of those areas and find some good rental properties. But Dana, let's kind of talk about what should people be looking for, because there are certain basics, right? You've got to cover the basic needs of a renter, but you don't need a theater room. So what makes a good rental property?
Yeah. So let's just start with class of property. So there's different classes of property. It starts with luxury, which is the nicest, right? Class A, Class B, Class C, Class D. And I always say on both ends, it's really difficult. And you can make it work in the Class D space. I've seen people do it very successfully. But if you are like a working professional and you're buying your first rental property, I wouldn't go to either end. And here's why. On the luxury side, that 1% rule never works. Just to let you know, that never works on the luxury side. On the flip side, on the Class D properties, most of the tenants you get there do not have bank accounts. They're paying with cash. And you really have to know the market. You have to live in it and know, okay, this guy, works in this job. He's stable, at least from the perspective of he's always going to pay cash and stuff. But you really need to know the market and be hands-on and collect the rent yourself through cash and stuff like that.
Which is not scalable.
Yeah, no, it's not scalable.
Yeah.
That's why I really like the Class C and the Class B type properties, because you can objectively qualify your tenants. And why I say objective is you don't want fair housing violations. You make sure that you're just looking at the numbers and what is objectively written on paper to let you know what is the risk of this tenant defaulting on rent or having a lease violation. And so in the Class B and Class C, you can get tenants who have credit scores, have bank accounts, right? They're going to transfer the rent to you, and you can use data based on their employment, income, all of that to make sure that they're qualified for the property. And so those are the best ones. And then it's also about the neighborhood of where the property is. And so what I mean by that is if you look at a neighborhood and see that you are buying the most expensive property in that neighborhood, it's probably not the best rental property. You want to have one either in the middle or on the lower end from that perspective. So then it goes down to the neighborhood and really understanding it from there.
Yeah. Any thought on size? Because, there are a lot of, I have a couple clients that, they like smaller apartments if it's multifamily, or if they're breaking something up into a multifamily unit or an accessory dwelling or something like that. They kind of focus on the smaller, the better. And you get to the point of, we have to be very careful that we're not violating fair housing, especially as a licensee, myself being a real estate broker. We're always, we really have to hold ourselves to very high standards and try and make sure our clients are doing the same thing. So, but do you have, some real estate investors say they like a smaller place because if they have less people in the house, there's going to be less damage, right? So that's kind of like a school of thought where, they won't move a whole lot of people into the place or something like that. And I know they're, I don't know all the different state laws, but how many occupants you can have or what you're supposed to have. But I do know, the bigger the place, it seems like the more people that will come and live there, right? So is there like a sweet spot on or rule of thumb to size?
No, not really, because it depends on your investment strategy. If you have a 1 bedroom or a 2 bedroom, you're going to have more turnover. And actually, what you see with a 3 or 4 bedroom is a lot of times tenants stay for a lot longer. And the reason is if they have a roommate situation, one roommate might come out, but another one comes in. Or if it's a family, their kids are in that school system. And with kids are expensive. If they're renting, it's harder for them to save money. If I'm single, I can save a lot of money on the side. I don't have all these kid expenses. And so it depends. But one thing I would say is size versus number of bedrooms. So you definitely want a larger number of bedrooms versus the square footage, because when people are looking at places, they're looking at number of bedrooms, potentially bathrooms, but bedrooms are more important. So like if it's huge square footage and fewer bedrooms, not a good investment from that perspective. And then other things to keep in mind, at least with like single family homes, is pools are terrible. Like pools are a liability, something just waiting to happen. So those types of things you also have to take into consideration. But I think it depends because like here in California where I am, it's a 2+1 rule. Actually, Fair Housing will tell you otherwise, but I won't go into that. It's basically 2 people per room plus 1 extra is the Fair Housing rule. So if you have a 2 bedroom, you can have 5 people in the place, 2 per bedroom plus 1 other occupant. And you can't discriminate against that. So if someone comes with 5, and they have the income and credit requirements, first come, first serve, you've got to take them over others. And so from that perspective, what I would say is it's a case-by-case basis. It depends on what you're looking at. I think generally you're right, like bigger versus number of bedrooms is not ideal. But know that if you're investing in studios and a studio or a fewer number of bedrooms, you are going to see a lot more turnover because it's easier for that person to move. When you have a family with 3 kids and they have all the toys and junk moved into the garage, they're not going to want to move as quickly. They're kind of there to stay. That's why single family homes have a lower turnover than apartments. Apartment complexes will have a much higher turnover.
Yeah, and you guys listening, turnover means spending money. So, obviously, at the very least, you're going to be painting. And if you have carpet in these rentals, I mean, carpet gets destroyed, and I've seen carpet get destroyed and need to be replaced on an annual basis if you have tenants that are moving out. So sometimes you can't clean and, you're collecting those security deposits. But I can tell you one thing, if you have $1,500 or $1,600 a month rental and you're collecting, $1,500 or $1,600 in security deposit, they get eaten up pretty quick. So Dana, you have said that more than to get into the rental side, the management side of the rentals, did you say that more than 74% of the landlords self-manage? Was that the number?
Close, 72%. So 72% self-manage. Most people, and this is remote too, like all of the landlords on Hemlane self-manage.
Gotcha. So what do you think the main reason for that is? Not that, obviously your platform is set up for that, but why do you think 72% of landlords self-manage?
I think the biggest thing there is actually cost, honestly. I think the number one thing is cost. They look at the 8 to 10% of monthly rent, and they say that's 50% of my bottom line. So I think the number one thing is cost.
Yeah. Yeah, probably so. I mean, locally here, that's about what you're going to spend on average, so you think that's pretty much nationwide, 8 to 10% management fee seems to be a common. Yeah. So what are some of the pros of having a management company? I mean, obviously, the obvious rent collection, things like that. But, and then if you're out of state, I mean, you almost need to have a property manager. But what are some of the other benefits that a good management company will bring to the table?
Yeah, good question. So one thing I would say about that 8 to 10%, just so you guys know, is that with that, property managers don't make that much money. It is a lower margin business, and Todd, you know that as well. So I think what it is real estate investors don't look at their time and how much time they spend on management, which is why we basically put it into a platform to basically say, okay, we have this platform and most of it's technology doing it. So you don't have to do it and the property manager doesn't have to do it. It's being done on a platform. But one thing I would say with it is that with a manager, there's a lot of reasons to get one. And the very first thing I would say is emotion. If you have a tenant who is basically a professional tenant, and a professional tenant is one who can get around the system and knows more about tenant landlord law than you and makes your life miserable. Maybe sort of like my children upstairs that you can hear making my life miserable. From that perspective, if you have that, it can be emotional. You basically go to sleep at night thinking about that, thinking about the emotion of, oh my gosh, that tenant did this and now I'm going to have a lawsuit potentially. That is a reason to have a manager. It takes you completely out of that and you have that peace of mind. And that's why it's so important to set up your business professionally. The other thing is just the expertise that they have. The only thing, we build it as much into the platform as possible, but there is something to say that a property manager has 10 plus years of experience of doing this and handling really difficult cases, and they understand and know it better than anyone else. And so having a manager for that reason makes a lot of sense. And then the third thing I'll leave you with hiring a property manager is if you're not operationally focused, like you can't get tasks done. Basically, Todd sends you an email and it takes you 3 weeks to respond to it. You probably shouldn't be doing management yourself. And so just having that hands off, take the keys and run with it is great. But I do think 72% self-manage because of cost, and that's always what they say. But one other thing I would kind of mention with it is that when you buy a physical asset, like when you buy real estate, it is a physical asset. And so from that perspective, you're kind of thinking I'm going to be involved to some extent. And so while the surveys will show people say it's cost, it's because it's expensive, I also think it's that mental, I just purchased a property, I want some control over that asset. That's my biggest asset. Like you might put $10,000 into stocks, but you've put, if you bought, 5 properties and had down payments on them, you have over $100,000 in that. And that's something you can control. You can't control the stock. You can't go to the board and say you're running this company wrong, but you can do that with your rental properties. So, if you look at surveys of that 72% who self-manage, they'll say it's all because of cost. I also think that there's this mental thing of I just purchased a property. I actually can physically control the outcome of this investment. So let me do it. So I think that has a lot to do with it as well. And that's where, for property managers, it's interesting that pricing hasn't changed. I almost think if they change their pricing, they might get more real estate investors to come and use their product if they had flexible, unbundled packages. You just want repair coordination? Great, we'll just do that. I think a lot of property managers could win a lot more if they unbundled services very similar to us and offered more so that real estate investors still felt like they had control of some things.
Yeah. Well, I know locally, I have a company that I will use for evictions. I don't like to do the eviction process. So you talk about, having sort of like a menu of services, interviewing the management company, because I don't use a management company for the day-to-day management. I call my own contractors for repairs and things like that, but I am accessible for my property, for my tenants. But I don't like the unpleasantness of going down, filing the failure to pays and things like that. So I will actually pay a property management company to do that for me. So, if you're thinking about, should you have a property management company or not, maybe see who's local And maybe will they do like a menu of services for you, so that you can kind of pick and choose what it is that you do. Dana definitely touched on some real important things. And I can tell you from having years of experience managing properties and rentals, cash. You can't be worrying about somebody dropping off cash to your office or going and picking up the rent, things like that. You need to make sure that if you are getting into this business, that you do have tenants that will either responsibly pay your money by the first of the month. And, that means sending in a check without a reminder call. But more importantly, it'd be nice if you could just ACH their account, because if they have a checking account and you can just hit that account, on the first of every month, it's going to save you a lot of management time and, and a lot of headache. I will say also, and, we'll get into the tenant selection because it is very important, but I will say that it is important that where I've made my biggest mistakes with my tenants is being too lenient on certain things, like rent being due by the first of the month, or by the fifth of the month, it's late and it's a service charge. So I've actually been bad through the years of enforcing that. So it's kind of hard to reel it in once you've already started those bad behaviors. The other thing that I've kind of neglected through the years, just being completely transparent, is there's sort of like do I raise rents or don't I raise rents? And there's a lot of schools of thought, because what happens is if you think about a tenant and you're constantly raising them, let's just say 2 or 3% a year, for example, and that's built into your lease, and all of a sudden they know they're going to get that increase. Think about yourself. When you were renting, if you ever rented, you were thinking, well, do I need to give them enough advance notice because this is starting to get too expensive for me? And now I'm thinking about, with the renewal coming up, moving. So, I've in turn said, hey, look, on a lot of cases, I don't raise the rents because I'm locked into a 30-year mortgage, or if it's a commercial loan, I'm locked in for 5 years or 10 years at a certain rate, and I just want them to stay. So you're going to have to decide whether you want to raise the rents and where that makes sense and where it doesn't make sense. But I will tell you, send them late notices, send them failure to pay, file, because we're going to talk a little bit about what happened through the pandemic. And I know we're getting, close to wrapping up here. We do have a question here. How do you manage single family homes in rural towns with a small real estate market and little to no rental management companies? Dana, you want to answer that?
Yeah, definitely. So it depends on the town. It definitely depends on the town. One thing I would say, if you're a real estate investor, which we start with, so we'll look at the town and say whether or not we can get 5-star agents, leasing agents on the ground, and contractors. And we know that within 24 hours. But if the town does not meet our criteria, I would question if it's a good place to invest. And here's why. If it doesn't meet our criteria, it means it's not a growing town. It means that people are moving away from that rural area, right? Trends, jobs are moving away. They're not moving in. And over time, you're going to find it difficult to find qualified tenants there. And you're not going to get the appreciation on the property. There's a balance of cash flow and appreciation. So that is where I'd really question it. Small rural towns. There's some that are good, like military towns that were small and now we're booming, and you have the steady, stable income of military there, and it's a benefit to be there. But I've seen real estate investors who come to us in these towns that are like 5,000 people. People are moving out of the town. The only people are staying, it's a little bit desolate. And if we can't provide a real estate agent for the leasing and contractors who are reliable and good, we will let you know you can use our platform to manage the property. but you have to either be on our basic or essential package, which basically means you bring your own contractors in and you bring your own leasing agent, or you do your leasing yourself. Because if we aren't going to be able to find quality folks there, then it's not going to be a good experience for you. So I would kind of question that. If it's too rural, I would look at doing some 1031 exchange and going to an area where a market, jobs are coming in, Amazon just built a warehouse there, those types of things, or they're going to something that gives you kind of checkbox of, yeah, this place is going to be a great place for the 10 years to have tenants there. And Todd, I had something to say about your rent increases. I've kind of a differing opinion on it. So with the lock-in, I say, well, COVID was different. I think a lot of people didn't raise rents because of that. But sometimes I've seen tenants in properties where they've stayed with us they've been there for like 10 years plus. And if I didn't raise, then suddenly, yeah, the first 5 years, it made sense not to raise. But now I'm like, oh gosh, now I'm going on 15 years with them and not raising. So I always set that precedent that it's going to be raised, even if it's only like $10. Like the tenants are great. It's under market rate, but just to let them know there's going to be a slight increase.
Yeah.
And on top of that, always giving them two options. Now, some people don't give two options for certain reasons, but I say if you go to month, it's going to be raised by this much, and it's like a super high amount.
Yeah.
Or if you go annually, I'm going to raise it by just the $10 or even $5.
Yep.
And then they're like, wow, I'm getting a really good deal by signing an annual lease. It puts that into perspective, and it also sets that precedent that it's just going to be a tiny increase. And if it's only like $5 and it's still a bit under market, the cost of moving, the cost of putting a security deposit down somewhere else, and just the hassle of looking for other rentals that if you're slightly under market, they're not going to move, but at least it sets that precedent. So in year 10, if you find, wow, I'm really under market rate by $1,000, at least you've set that precedent that you are going to increase it. And maybe if that $5 to $10 goes up to 20 to 50 or slowly, whatever.
Oh, I don't disagree. Believe me, I don't suggest modeling after some of the mistakes that I've made through the years. I mean, I agree with you. And you see, sort of the trends too. If you look at the larger institutional, landlords or, big apartment landlords, I mean, a lot of them, they do just that. And it's a good thing to model after. Because it is a way of locking them in on the long term. But I do want to talk about the moratorium. But before we do that, because I know you and I in another meeting, we shared some sentiments on, the government jumping in and preventing landlords from evicting people. And I know that we'll get into that a little bit here. And I want to kind of keep it neutral, obviously, but because, I mean, it is a sensitive topic and we're talking about housing. But I do want to talk real quick about tenants. And I just want to give some points because over the last 15 years of being a landlord, I've dealt with some real nasty tenants and, really had some terrible experience through the years. And I just want to say that if you guys are considering getting into the business, yes, it is important that fair housing is your guide because you do not want to discriminate. And, you want to make sure that you're, giving everybody an opportunity, the fair opportunity. So I always believe in, write out your criteria, what it is that you're looking for so that you can be fair all across the board. But I always recommend that, you check out who is going to be living in your place and you set those guidelines up so that there aren't surprises later. And, some of those things that I always do is, I want to make sure that they're going to care for my place. I'm going to provide a great, safe place for them to live, but I also want them to take care of it too. So it's important for me to know, how they've treated places in the past, if I can find any of that out, whether they've been evicted. So doing those background checks and things like that, and do all 50 states because, there are different services out there that can, you don't want to just check the Maryland, like we're in Maryland or California, but, have they been evicted, in any of the states? Because people that have a tenancy, there is a term, professional tenant, and that's not a good term. That means that they're, they move around and they use the system. And then you have to decide things like pets. Some people do have pets. I mean, service animals are, something that you can't certainly prevent if it really is a service pet. And Dana, you can talk about that. And then, also, a growing concern is source of income. So you have to be careful, because here in Maryland, and I don't know about other states, but it is now illegal to discriminate based on source of income. So we get a lot of landlords and investors. They'll say, well, I don't want to do Section 8. And we don't call it Section 8 anymore. It's called the Housing Choice Voucher Program. But you need to be familiar with those voucher programs in your state. You also need to be familiar, is it mandatory that you accept them? Because it is here in Maryland. That can't be the disqualifying, element to not renting to somebody. You have to, if they have, it's called, you can't discriminate based on source of income. So if their source of income is a voucher here in Maryland, you now must consider them. But Dana, anything you want to add to, tenant selection to kind of, this is the make or break for landlords, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is why people run for the hills and they never come back, because they had these bad experiences.
Yeah, totally. So one, I'll touch on just a couple of things you said, because I know you wanted to also get to the eviction moratorium. So the first one I'll touch upon is pets. We don't see service animals that often if someone trying to bend the rules. Typically, if someone has a service animal, they need it, they have the doctor's note and stuff. What we see is the emotional support animal as the one that people are trying to get around. And this is where I said it's not good to have your primary residence become an accidental landlord if it's not a good investment, right? If you haven't done your research to see what other investments are out there. Because I've always told people, allow pets and charge pet rent. You can get an extra $25 or $30 a month per pet. And you can charge a refundable security deposit, additional amount for pets. Just call it part of the security deposit. Don't call it a pet deposit. But you can go through and do that, because a lot of times when I see like fair housing violations of someone saying, oh, I have an emotional support animal, they're just trying to get around the fact that you said no pets, right? And you always need a process. So if they do say they have an emotional support animal, it's okay, great. We need a letter written from a verified doctor with a license. You can look up the license to make sure, and then you have to now sign my reasonable accommodation form. So have a process with it to make sure that, it's legitimate. And usually those that are trying to get around the rules are kind of like, okay, yeah, I'll pay your pet rent, or I'll go somewhere else type thing. But yeah, the objective criteria is an interesting one, because you're right. You do have to stay up to date with a tenant landlord law. The source of income, for example, Section 8, you can deny them if they don't meet your credit criteria. But if they meet your credit criteria, and them with the voucher equals your rent to income ratio, if it's 3-to-1 or whatever it is. So 3-to-1 basically means they make, if you have $1,000 rental, they make at least $3,000 a month between them and their housing voucher. Then you still have to accept them. And so it's following these clear guidelines and books to go through the process. And you can't discriminate unless you say it was objective. This is, for some reason, this is going to cause me financial damage, financial risk, or they didn't meet my criteria, or something where there's a lease violation where I'm worried that they're going to have another lease violation in there. So yeah, it's important to get educated. It doesn't take that long. You can watch a couple of YouTube videos on it and see what your state has as those laws. But I mean, common ones I've seen is like great family neighborhood. that's discriminating against people who don't have families. So don't do it. So there's certain things like that where you just want to make sure you're very objective. Don't ask for a photo with the application. You could be discriminating. You can ask for a government issued ID with a lease, but you shouldn't with the application. So I think all that tenant selection stuff is really important. I mean, we have it built in where it's like very clear cut of here are the things that qualify or don't qualify, and everything else we extract from the process to make sure that they are meeting your objective criteria.
Definitely. Great information. And like I said, I mean, if you guys are listening and you have questions, we'd love to hear from you. We'll also publish all of Dana's information on her company and her in the show notes to whatever platform you're watching or listening. And we certainly appreciate you tuning in. Now, let's just kind of wrap up with this moratorium, because here we are in July. The moratorium has been extended, right? Biden extended the moratorium, so it was for another month. What have you found? You know, and I'll start by saying, when COVID started out, you know, when we were really, I mean, in the industry, everyone was concerned, right? Not just for our safety, but, you know, when we're looking at these independent landlords, you know, we're providing housing for people. And, you know, despite the fact that people think that we're, you know, getting rich off of one or two rentals, certainly we know that's not the case, Dana. You and I know that. And, you know, when they said that, you know, you couldn't evict, and, you know, based on them not paying the rent, that the criteria was that they were affected by COVID. That's all they had to say. And basically, they're still in these apartments or these rentals. We were thinking when it happened that, oh my gosh, this is going to be tragic. We actually found the exact opposite. You know, I know that of my tenants, I had one that didn't pay 1 month, and he did end up making payments. And we had some tenants that fell behind, but they caught up. And I think that overall, we did a really good job as a country in getting ourselves through this, whether it was the, you know, the PPP that was available for employers to keep their people on payroll. And certainly there were some winners and losers. You know, we're definitely keeping it neutral because it is a hot topic. But, you know, what is your opinion? Do you think that we have, you know, I guess the question is, what can we learn? Because I know a lot of landlords that were affected will say that they had trouble with the tenants that became even more problematic, where they stopped paying. But these were historically tenants that were not paying on a regular basis. But those landlords say, I will never sign another year lease, because you could evict based on, you know, what we call tenant holding over, right? So if you have a month-to-month lease, you could cancel the lease, give them notice that you're not renewing that month-to-month lease, and that they could get them out. Took months to do it, but they still were hearing those cases where tenant holding over. What do you think, being somebody that's in this business, you know, in the rental industry, what do you think we can take away as investors, as landlords, based on watching, you know, the government step in and say, look, for landlords that have these properties that are deemed commercial properties, there really is no forbearance program for them. They had to continue to pay their mortgage. They had to continue to pay their taxes. They had to continue to pay their water bills. But yet for maybe more than a year, they didn't collect rent. What kind of takeaways do you think investors should be getting out of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a reminder that you cannot rely on the government, and that you yourself need to set yourself up and figure out all the scenarios and cases and what could go wrong, what how you're going to communicate it and how you're going to get through it. Because like you said, wasn't a level playing ground. Some people got affected more than others. I don't think that the media provided accurate numbers, at least from what we're looking at. I don't believe anyone's numbers except ours. Maybe the Census Bureau. I do believe those, but I don't believe a lot of numbers unless like we're reporting them and we've verified them for data accuracy, because we have a data team that really makes sure numbers are correct. And I think it's a lesson learned about something that you had said, Todd, at the beginning. This is a people business. And really knowing the people and working together on it. I mean, if we have to go through something like this again, or anything, even if it's not obviously another pandemic, but some situation you're building, half of it burns down or anything, how do you get the people together and align incentives? I always talk about aligning incentives, because when you're in the people business, it's not about you, it's about them. And so with tenants, like one of the things I saw that's worked really well is, okay, this has happened to you, you've lost your job or whatever. How can we make the accommodations to help you to get to and put together a new contract that's signed of this is what's happened at this point. You're going to move home with your parents. You're going to do this, whatever it is, making these accommodations, alternative payment plans, whatever it was, to make sure you could get through it together and align incentives to reduce the amount of damage caused to you as a landlord. And that's where I saw a lot of stark differences between how real estate investors handled it. And those who tried to align incentives and put themselves in the other shoes were the ones who won. But yeah, I mean, we still haven't seen the government. I mean, there was $50 billion allocated in rental assistance by Congress. And I think they're still trying to allocate and figure out where it goes. And who knows where part of that money is going to, but you just can't rely on them. And so in these particular cases, it's on you. It's on you and your tenants to figure out what to do and how to handle it.
Great points. Guys, we really appreciate you tuning in tonight. Dana, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Yeah, thanks so much for Todd for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was great. And guys, reach out until next week. We'll talk to you soon.